Yo, what's going on? It's your boy Brendan Berg. Yo, just checking with you guys, man. Over here in Arkansas right now, I had some little situation with my truck, man, with the coolant. I had to figure it out. I'm using it on transit heater. That's like something you takes a little bit of coolant, and the coolant is getting heated by the engine going into the tank. To keep a product at a certain temperature. But yeah, man, I just like I said, I was figuring that out. So I kind of figured it out a little bit, but I do a little bit of MacGyver on it. So, but yeah, I'm back. I'm finally back rolling. I've been trying to figure this out since this morning. So a little happy that finally rolling with kind of a little bit more with no problem, but. Yeah, man, I really want to jump in a little bit. I really want to definitely do fun fact of history. Yeah, do a fun fact of history. Not really necessarily fun, but it's definitely going to be a facts of history. Before I definitely get on that, I definitely want to jump a little bit. I know the Supreme Court actually voted in favor of employers winning the arbitration, that they can pretty much that favored an employee cannot really sue for unfair wages, unfair firing practice, or overworking, or basically being overworked with wages, or not reclaiming lost wages. And also too, I think the Supreme Court also ruled in favor of technically, I think, almost ending the class action lawsuits. And now, like I said, I think Yvette Cornell, she talked about it really extensively, and shout out to her. Definitely check her page out. I think she got the Breaking Brown family. I think that's basically what she rocked with. But she talked about it as well. And this is kind of a big deal because this is actually another blow for labor rights. And labor rights, if you think about it, you wipe away labor right, you're almost technically going right back into slavery. You know what I'm saying? That's what kind of separates a free man from a slave, is labor rights. And if they virtually destroy that, then pretty much all there is left is being a slave. And that's really something that you need to take account of. And unfortunately, like I said, a lot of the laborers softening in the past 10 years, or at least like in the past 10 years, was due to a little bit of the Bush, most of the Obama, and with Trump. So you got three presidents that have something to do with the weakening of the labor laws. And that was already, like I said, the weakening of the labor laws was already going on with Uber and Lyft and everything else, and their business practice. So definitely a big thing to check out. I'm actually going to leave a link in the bar so you guys can check that out. All right, man. Let's get into the fun fact of history, or facts of history. I really want to talk about the Reconstruction era. I know a lot of people always never really talk about that period of time in the United States after the Civil War. I know a lot of things were going on at that time during the Civil War, but the Reconstruction era is a very interesting, unique, very, very rare time of black advancement, black empowerment, and also in somewhat of a black self-identity as well. It was almost like a self-pride at that time. I think the period was from 1863 to 1877. It started with the Emancipation Proclamation with Lincoln address at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It definitely basically, it stated that all slaves in the Confederacy need to be basically free. But the thing about that speech, I told a lot of people, and some people don't really know about that speech. Had a few loopholes in it, and the loopholes of that speech was it only demand freedom to slaves that come from rebellion states or states that was physical battlegrounds. So, or union control, basically. That's what the Emancipation Proclamation came from. It's not really. It was a status, but it was more of like states that was in rebellion, or basically in union hands, or in a state of war. So, but really 5 states was not really included in that speech, and they were deemed as border states at the time. You had at the time, I think it was Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and I'm thinking 4. If I'm mistaken, I'm thinking it's 4. Yeah, 4. Yeah, 4. Yeah, it was like I thought it was 5. I thought it was 5 states. But it was Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and Maryland. I mean, wait a minute. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm getting confused on these border states. All right, I'm gonna just do it one more time, not to try to confuse myself, but feel like I am confusing myself. Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. Yeah, Delaware. I mean, basically those was pretty much the border states that was pretty much. Oh, and Missouri. Okay, man, I don't know why. Missouri was included. Yeah, I knew it was 5. So I'm like, cause I knew it was those states. But I'm trying to think. It was supposed to be 5 states. I'm like, I'll say, okay, it was the show me state, Missouri. Those are the only states that actually was excluded from the speech. Texas was also excluded from the speech as well, but Texas wasn't a battleground state as well. There really wasn't too many wars. A lot of the wars was fought in Arkansas and parts of Tennessee and Louisiana, but it wasn't fought in Texas. So that's why I always tell people Texas wasn't included at the time, but at the same time it was also it was also projected not to be a battleground state. So a lot of slave owners would escape to Texas with their slaves, to escape the war and stuff going on, and they moved into Texas. But Texas wasn't protected under the border states, that's what they call Missouri, Kentucky, Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland. But but really, let me get back into that. You start with the proclamation. Then, after you had a lot of, after Lincoln's, assassination, you had Andrew Johnson. Now he became like the 17th president. he was really a Confederate sympathizer. He was an ex-slave owner. You know, not just a senator, but he owned slaves. So he was very lenient in the southern economy and the southern custom of slavery. So he was very lenient about that. And he was very opposed of giving civil rights and full citizenship basically to the free blacks, to the ex-slaves. So he was very against that. And the Republican Party kind of saw that he was, and they actually took control of the Congress with him in there. That's when they had majority of both houses and everything else, and they could override. Yeah, he was a Republican as well, but they override him to pass a lot of laws. There were 3 amendments that they passed during this period, and all 3 amendments had ties to basically to the new free blacks. You know, but they said there was 3 visions that came from this period after the Civil War. You had the Reconstructionists. That was people that was basically coping with the destruction, the death of the war on both sides. Then you had the white supremacists that really just couldn't fabric to see that their former property is now free, and now they got to treat their former property as actual human beings. So this is where the white supremacist aspect really come in full swing. This is where the Ku Klux Klan and a lot of different types of policies and laws really started coming and started origin from, is the white supremacist vision. That was basically pure terror and pure violence against blacks. And then you have the Maclamationists, and that was like people like Booker T. Washington, W. Du Bois. You had some people like, Franklin Douglass. You had, Sojourner Truth. You had a lot of different types of people at that time that was, they were basically fighting for full citizenship, full rights of being an American for black people. And actually, a lot of them actually was involved in politics and in government. As you know, Booker T. was an advisor to the president, so he definitely was doing his thing at that time. And during the 14th Amendment, that's when they passed the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was a conclusion of the right to vote, and also granted full citizenship to the free black people in the former Confederate. And I told a lot of people, I know that everybody talking about the 13th Amendment, but the 14th Amendment was supposed to overshadow the 13th Amendment. Now, if you did, commit a crime and stuff, but it wasn't really used until you had a lot of the old Southerners, basically, white supremacists, retaking the South again. Because at the time, a lot of the North actually controlled the South for that period of time, during that period. And because they actually was, like I said, the government was negotiating all the labor contracts. They were protecting blacks, so they were also negotiating. They were also building schools and building some churches and homes, new homes. They were giving business grants. You had a lot of people from the North coming and investing in the South. You had a lot that invested in the newly constructed black areas. So it was a lot of progression in the South at that time. And a lot of people don't understand. I was like, black people really, they actually was enjoying the full citizenship that we somewhat are experiencing now. But like I always tell people, when the civil rights movement came, I told my dad one time, wait a minute, if you already got all your civil rights during in the late 1800s, why you got in 100+ years? Why you got to go back 100 years later? You got to go back and fight for it again. That don't make no sense. But that's when, like I said, when the old people that was basically sympathizing with the Confederates taking power, that's when they introduced Jim Crow and segregation, yada yada yada. But even at that time of violence and harassment, black people was still had a self of pride and still a somewhat of a sovereign state of mind at that time to basically live without and do with. And I think maybe our grandparent generation, I call the civil rights generation, I think they mistook that when they were growing up. See, they worry about the violence and they worry about the violence and the harassment. Instead of really, we want to keep what our parents built, but we want to protect it. Instead of arming themselves and militarize themselves so they can still keep these black economy going in a lot of their neighborhoods and areas, to actually, it would have built up and increased wealth. They totally went the opposite into integration. And I think I told my grandfather, well, that didn't make no sense. You have to go back in 100 years just to get civil rights that were already given to black people 100 years ago. You shouldn't be trying to wait 100 years ago, and you gotta fight. But instead of fighting for the equal rights to go back and start your economy that you're coming from, you just chose to integrate, and from that you sacrifice your economy in the process. So I think that was my only downside of the civil rights era. I think the point was, they kind of basically, they didn't follow their parents and how they were living and basically maintaining a solely black, sovereign economy, and they just chose to really want to just go in with white people as integrationists, and that was probably the worst thing. Because the thing is, you can't really fully join somebody that really never respects you in the first place. It just won't work. The relationship will be tainted. The relationship can be corrupted. It will be corrosive, and it will be harmful in a way. And that's where a lot of states, I think, for our generation and newer generation, that's the state that we're pretty much in now. But definitely I want to go back into Reconstruction, because there was a lot of things taking place during that time. You had, a lot of people don't know it, but West Virginia was created at that time. Actually during that period. I think the creation of West Virginia was 1870. I know their statehood was was basically post-Civil War. But you had a lot of states. Well, not a lot of states. You had maybe one state that was created from the Civil War. And that was West Virginia. As well, you had a lot of different politicians white and black, that actually blossomed and was very vividly strong supporters and advocate of black black and advancement, of black freedom, of basically civil rights for blacks as a whole. You had in one case, a guy named John Henry, white dude. He came from New York. He was a House of Representative from Arkansas. He basically pushed for civil rights, the rights to vote, and free school for black and white kids. And it wasn't segregated. It was actually all integrated. And yes, a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people don't know that. You know, during the Reconstruction era in the South, there was no such thing as segregation. You had white kids going to the same school as black kids were. So a lot of people, you can miss me with this, like, well, it's always been segregation. No, segregation didn't come till after the 1877, when the people that were sympathizers to the Confederate retook control of the states, and then they started from the white supremacy views that they had of the blacks, and the jealousies and the anger of basically they have to respect them as actually human beings and not just a form of property. They started, that's when they introduced the Jim Crow and segregation and everything else. But before then, it was basically integrated then. A lot of people don't know that. Black people was really flourishing at that time period. But at the same time, you had huge pockets of resistance during that time, even in the Reconstruction, because you had a lot of race riots happening. I think one of the two main ones was in New Orleans and Memphis, where I think hundreds of blacks were killed in those two riots. So it was a lot of violence, a lot of civil unrest that was basically racial motivated that happened in that time. But yeah, you also too, during the Reconstruction era, that's when you came out with the Juneteenth celebration. I'm gonna definitely talk about that, and maybe in real soon, because that celebration should be very big within black communities around the country, especially in Texas. I live in Houston, and it should be big in Houston. But I rarely ever see a huge Juneteenth celebration. And plus, you got like a non-organization that's trying to change the name of Juneteenth, and they're calling it Summer Jam. And I always tell people that's a New York thing. Like, mainly when New York have their Summer Jam, they have their Summer Jam, and then right after Summer Jam, like maybe a day or two later, they have the Puerto Rican Parade. But the Puerto Rican Parade don't get me wrong, it's a regional thing. A lot of places with a huge Puerto Rican population, they celebrate it. But in New York, the Puerto Rican Parade in New York is like the largest Latino parade in the country. You know what I'm saying? I've been there. It was nice. It was nice. But yeah, man, I'm very aware of a lot of cities are now changing their name from Juneteenth to Summer Jam. And I tell a lot of people, Summer Jam, that's a New York thing. That should not even pertain. I mean, that's just something that was commercially they decided to, because actually Juneteenth was celebrated everywhere, except for 5 states. You know what I'm saying? But it was celebrated everywhere. Like I said, I'm definitely going to talk about Juneteenth. There was a lot of other things going on during that time, and even after the construction era, because you had the Law War, you know what I'm saying, the Carolina, you had Mexico and the Franco War going on, but that was during the time of the Civil War, because I think it started in 1861. So you had a lot of things going on. You had Canada. I think they actually passed some policies, and it was very racial motivated. Um, just expelling a lot of Native Americans out of their land up there in Canada. So it was a lot of things going on even during the Reconstruction era. But even though it was a lot of things going on, but that was actually even though it was a time of very, very hard violence and terror, that was actually one of the few bright spots of blacks, because one, they won their freedom, and they were granted full citizenship. You know what I'm saying? So it was, and the right to vote was a very big deal. So that's why I always tell people, how can you talk about the civil rights movement in the '60s, but we were already granted that 100 years ago, 100 years ago, earlier than the civil rights movement. You know what I'm saying? So I believe maybe some black people should have became more militarized at that time. I think the civil rights generation should have been more militarized and more, really just more pro-black and just dealing with themselves instead of just integrating. Because I felt the integrating was the worst thing we really could have did. But that really just includes my video for today. I really didn't want to drag it out. But yeah, there was a few bright spots and some things I definitely wanted to talk about. Because like I said, it was many black people was actually really about black empowerment. And they were really doing it. A lot of them was succeeding. A lot of black people at that time was winning at that time. And I know it only lasts for, a decade or so, but to me, I feel that was a bright spot. Maybe around the 20s, it was a good 20s, and maybe, good maybe 10s, the 20s, there was an okay spot for blacks at that time. But I think at the construction right, I think that was a real bright optimism for black people, because that's when you feel like you finally arrived. You finally gonna be treated like any other human being on this planet. And some instinct was going to bat. The government was going for bat. It was a lot of they were giving out land grants. A lot of them was giving out business grants at that time. So it was a lot of black businesses, a lot of black areas, communities were thriving, being built, flourishing. So the economics of black people at that time was very strong, very strong. And like I said, I told people, you had a lot of black kids and white kids going to the same school. It wasn't segregated. So the construction era, the Reconstruction era, to me, is a spot that a lot of people don't like to talk about in the dumb society. And a lot of black people don't really talk about this in dumb society in our circle either, but it needs to be addressed.